I've worked in finance for long enough to know that big disasters never start with explosions. They start with something small, a missed line, a misplaced decimal, a number that doesn't look dangerous until someone decides it is. For me, it was 110, 134, a rounding variance in a vendor reimbursement sheet, the kind of thing that happens when two systems sync at different speeds. Normally, I would fix it in under a minute. Normally, no one would even see it. But that Tuesday morning, my manager, Carl, printed the discrepancy, circled the amount in red like it was a crime scene, and asked me to step into conference room 4B. His tone was rehearsed, his posture stiff, the blinds half closed like he wanted privacy but also an audience. "Sit," he said, tapping the folder with 2 fingers. I sat, because in corporate life, the one who sits first loses nothing. The one who rushes looks guilty. Carl slid the paper toward me. "Explain this." I glanced down. A standard variance report. A single line flagged. $110. "That's an automated rounding drift," I said calmly. "I can correct it manually." Carl leaned back, fingers steepled. "It's not that simple." That sentence always means someone is about to make it that simple. "What is this really about?" I asked. He exhaled dramatically. "This indicates a pattern. A pattern. Over $110. I felt the first shift, subtle like a draft through a closed window. Not panic, not anger, just clarity. Carl wasn't investigating. Carl was preparing something. "And," he continued, "I've discussed this with HR. There's a concern about judgment and oversight." He opened a second folder. The color of it, slate blue, told me exactly what it was before he even turned it around. A termination packet. My name already typed. The date already printed. Meaning the decision wasn't about 110. The form had been prepared before the discrepancy even registered. I didn't touch the paper. "You're firing me over a rounding error?" I asked slowly. "Over a documented oversight," he corrected. "Integrity is—" "Don't," I cut in. "Don't use the word integrity for a $100 variance." Carl's expression hardened. "Look, it's better to cooperate. Sign this and HR will process a quiet exit. No noise, no escalation." There it was, the real reason. He wanted silence, compliance, an easy checkmark. I'd seen it before. When someone upstairs needs a scapegoat for numbers that won't match, find the harmless guy, pin something small on him, wrap it in corporate language so it sounds bigger. Only this time, the harmless guy wasn't playing along. I pushed the slate folder back across the table with 1 finger. "No." Carl blinked. "No. I'm not signing anything today. You're refusing to cooperate. I'm refusing to be fired over $100. He stood abruptly, face tightening. "I'll involve HR." "You already did," I said, nodding at the pre-filled forms. "Which means, whatever this is, it didn't start today." Carl froze for a fraction of a second. Not long enough for most people to notice, but long enough for me. "In finance, you learn to see the half-second, where a lie cracks." He recovered quickly. "You're dismissed for the day," he said. "HR will contact you." He left the room with the kind of confidence people get when they think they've already won. I stayed seated for a moment. Not defeated, not shocked, just thinking. Because something didn't match. The variance had come from a weekly sync. A sync Carl himself reviewed. He could have fixed it before lunch. He could have ignored it entirely. But he chose this. A printed report, a staged meeting, HR forms ready, which meant one thing. Someone needed me gone for a reason that had nothing to do with $110. I returned to my desk, logged out slowly, methodically, and packed my things with more order than emotion. A few coworkers glanced my way, the cautious kind of glances you give when you suspect something's wrong but don't want to confirm it. On the elevator down, my phone buzzed with a message from HR. "Please schedule an exit meeting, earliest tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Exit, not discussion, not investigation. Exit. I should have been angry, maybe scared, but instead I felt something else. Curiosity. I drove home, opened my laptop, and pulled up the same vendor ledger Carl had flagged. I traced the line backward. 3 months, 6 months, a year. Everything was clean. Then I checked Carl's approval logs for the same vendors, and that's when I noticed it. Timestamps that didn't align. Amounts modified minutes before approvals. Adjustments that didn't match system logs. Nothing explosive, nothing cinematic. But enough inconsistencies to trigger questions. Questions like, why were there manual overrides in accounts Carl supervised? Why did some reports show 2 different values, depending on the view? Why had a harmless employee suddenly become a liability? I didn't jump to conclusions. I saved screenshots, notes, timestamps, that's all. I wasn't trying to expose anyone. Not yet. Because if there's one thing you learn in corporate finance, it's this. Big mistakes always show up eventually, and the people who make them always scramble for a shield. I just didn't know yet how big this one was. I didn't know that while Carl was trying to fire me over a $10 rounding drift, the quarterly auditors, people 2 floors above us with no interest in office politics, were reviewing every approval in our department, every log, every modification, every signature, and one of those signatures tied to one very large, very real discrepancy had Carl's name on it. HR scheduled my exit consultation for 9:30 a.m. They always choose mornings, fewer witnesses in the hallway, fewer eyes at the coffee station, easier to absorb a firing into the day like it never happened. I arrived at 9:28, not early enough to look desperate and not late enough to look scared. Mara, the HR rep, opened the conference room door. Professional smile, corporate neutral tone, clipboard already prepared. Morning, please take a seat. I sat, again calmly. She slid the same slate blue folder toward me, like Carl had rehearsed her movements with her beforehand. We reviewed the discrepancy identified in yesterday's report, she began. I almost laughed. HR doesn't review reports. HR reviews decisions made by someone else. And given the concerns raised, she continued, we believe a separation is the most appropriate course. There it was, scripted, sanitized, already decided. I opened the folder. Slowly, the page looked the same as yesterday. The termination form, my name spelled correctly. The checkbox ticked under voluntary resignation, encouraged. Encouraged, a corporate masterpiece of coercion. I'm not signing this, I said. Mara blinked once, the blink of someone who hadn't practiced the next line of the script, because no one ever refuses at this stage. You understand the seriousness of the issue, correct? I understand the 110, I said. I also understand timing. She shifted. What do you mean by timing? That report was printed yesterday at 9:04 a.m., I said, but my termination form was prepared at 8:17. Her posture changed, not dramatically, but enough. HR people don't like when the conversation moves into evidence. Do you have proof of that? You put the audit trail in the PDF metadata, I said. Not me. For the first time, Mara looked uncomfortable. This isn't an audit, she finally offered. This is a behavioral correction initiative. When trust is in question, I've never had a write-up, never missed a deadline, never failed an audit. But you're saying trust disappeared over a rounding variance. Silence. Because she couldn't say the truth. Someone told her what to think. I can't discuss other factors, she said carefully. Exactly. Carl hadn't just framed this. He'd built the frame months ago. I closed the folder. I'll wait for the auditor's findings, I said, standing. Her eyes flickered. Auditors? Yes, the quarterly review. They're on our floor this week, correct? Well, yes, but that's unrelated. Maybe, I said. Maybe not. I left the room without signing a single form. Mara didn't stop me. She couldn't. Because HR only has power when you cooperate. When you don't, they need instructions. Instructions Carl hadn't prepared. As I stepped out into the hallway, I noticed something. 2 auditors walking toward Carl's office carrying a binder, so thick it needed 2 hands. Not laptops, not tablets. A binder. Auditors only use physical binders when they're dealing with something big enough to require chain of custody protection. They knocked on Carl's door. He came out smiling, too wide, too rehearsed, and ushered them inside like he could charm away a spreadsheet. I didn't slow down, but I didn't speed up either. I watched the door close behind them, and for the first time since this started, I felt something close to predictability. If Carl was as clean as he pretended, he'd come out relaxed, maybe even smug. Instead, 15 minutes later, he walked out of his office with the expression of a man who just realized his parachute might be made of printer paper. His eyes scanned the hallway. They landed on me. He looked startled, like he didn't expect me to still be here, like he assumed I'd disappear quietly after the HR meeting. He stepped toward me. "We need to talk," he said. "We already did," I replied. "You can't ignore HR," he snapped. "I didn't ignore them," I said. "I listened. I chose not to sign." He lowered his voice. "You're making this worse for yourself." I met his eyes evenly. "Am I?" His jaw tightened. That was the moment I understood. He wasn't angry at the $110. He was angry that his plan wasn't going according to schedule. The next hours were strangely calm. No confrontation, no shouting, just tension. People in the office felt it too, the way you feel pressure drop before a storm. Co-workers spoke quieter. Printers hummed louder because conversations didn't fill the space. Around noon, the auditors returned to Carl's office with a second binder. This one labeled Q4 Reconciliation, Variance Exceptions. Exceptions. Plural. I watched Carl greet them, force confidence in his shoulders, but his hand hesitated on the doorknob. That hesitation said more than any spreadsheet ever could. At 12:47, something happened that I didn't expect. My coworker Elise, who rarely spoke to anyone unless numbers forced her to, stopped at my desk. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Is what true? That they're firing you over a rounding drift?" I nodded. She pressed her lips together. "That's not why." I paused. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, not out of fear, but calculation, like she was deciding whether helping me was worth the risk. Finally, she said quietly, "Carl's been nervous about the quarterly review for weeks. He's been in the office late every night. Conversations with compliance. Meetings he didn't put on the calendar." She looked down the hallway toward his office. "And yesterday, after you left, he asked the team to send him their access logs for the past 6 months." Access logs? The digital fingerprints of every employee action. "Whose logs did he ask for?" I asked. "Everyone's," she said, "except his own." And then she added, almost reluctantly, "He said something about needing a clean narrative before the auditors started asking questions." A clean narrative. That sentence hit me harder than Carl's termination form. Carl wasn't covering my mistake. Carl was preparing his story. I leaned back in my chair. "Thank you," I said. Elise nodded once and kept walking, eyes down like she hadn't spoken at all. But inside me, something shifted, a kind of quiet certainty. If Carl was this desperate to control the narrative, then something much worse than a $100 variance was waiting behind a spreadsheet. And whatever it was, he wasn't going to be able to hide it much longer. I always thought the day everything changes was just a phrase people used in books. But in corporate life, it's quieter than that. There's no alarm, no explosion, just the moment you realize everyone has already chosen a side, including you. By Wednesday morning, I knew I wasn't going back to HR, not because I wanted to win anything, but because I finally understood what the game was. Carl wasn't firing me over $110. He was insulating himself from something much bigger. I arrived at the office early, before the lights in the hallway came on. I sat in my chair, logged in, and pulled up the vendor reports again, not hunting for evidence, just trying to understand the pattern. Patterns matter. Patterns tell stories people don't want to tell out loud. The same vendor adjustment appeared across 4 different months, each time just before approval, each time with Carl's credentials, each time followed by a manual override that didn't match internal logs. Small leaks, barely noticeable unless you stacked them. By 8:30 a.m., the office looked normal again. Coffee cups, keyboards, the soft hum of printers. But underneath, everyone felt the change. Even people who didn't know about my HR meeting were avoiding eye contact. When auditors walk your floor, even innocent people start checking their hands like they're holding something guilty. At 9:10, the two auditors, the ones with the binders, stepped out of Carl's office. They didn't look upset. They looked interested. That's worse. One of them, a woman in a gray blazer, held a sheet of paper like it was radioactive. She knocked on Sandra's door. Our department head. Sandra stepped out. They whispered. Then she looked up at Carl's office with an expression I'd never seen on her face. Not shock. Realization. The kind of realization you only see when a leader just understood they trusted the wrong person. She closed her door gently, almost respectfully, like she was preparing for a funeral. That was the moment I felt something crack. Not in the office, but in me. Because until then I still believed this wasn't personal. That this was just corporate politics, ego, timing. But the look on Sandra's face told me this wasn't politics. This was exposure. Carl wasn't protecting the department. He was protecting himself. And he was perfectly willing to give up people he considered replaceable to do it. Around 10 shuck, my inbox pinged. From Carl, please come to my office at 10:15, mandatory. I stared at the email for a moment, not because I was afraid, but because the word mandatory told me he thought he still had control over me. He didn't. When I entered, he closed the door behind me quietly, as if noise might alert predators. Sit, he said. I'll stand, I replied. His jaw flickered. Losing small battles infuriated him more than losing big ones. We have an opportunity to resolve this situation, he began, leaning forward, but you need to cooperate. I met with HR, I said. I declined to sign. That was a mistake. His voice sharpened. They're reviewing your performance file right now. Good, I said. I'd like them to see all of it. He didn't like that, not because of what was in my file. My reviews were spotless. But because suddenly he wasn't steering the conversation. He stood up. Let's be clear, he said, hands flat on his desk. Auditors don't care about excuses. They look for inconsistencies, and they will find them. If you stay on your current path, you may face... He hesitated, not for effect, for fear. Professional consequences. There. Finally something real. You're talking about me? I said. But you're worried about yourself. His face reddened. This isn't about me. Then why were you in the office at midnight 3 times last week without logging into the building system? His mouth opened, then closed. He hadn't expected me to know that. But I did, because our building uses a dual system. Badge logs at the front desk, and motion-activated camera timestamps in the hallways. One of the auditors mentioned the discrepancy in passing on Monday. I simply listened. I don't have to explain my hours to you, he said stiffly. You don't, I agreed, but you will explain them to someone. For the first time, he stepped back. Fear looks different on different people. On Carl, it looked like calculation. Eyes darting, jaw clenching, a man trying to rebuild a collapsing narrative while still standing in it. This isn't, he started. I raised a hand. I'm done here. And I walked out. Not because I'd won, not because he'd lost, but because the moment I saw the fear in his expression, the full realization finally hit me. He tried to fire me, not to remove a problem, but to erase a witness. By lunch, the atmosphere in the department was heavy enough to taste. People whispered more, avoided Carl's office like it was leaking gas. At 1:03 p.m., Sandra stepped out and called a brief department meeting. 10 minutes. No agenda. Everyone present. We gathered in the common area, pretending to look casual. She stood by the projector screen but didn't turn it on. Thank you for joining, she began carefully. I want to address 2 things. Her eyes swept the room. First, the auditors will be conducting extended interviews today and tomorrow. Please cooperate fully. Everyone nodded. Second, she continued, I understand there's been tension regarding internal reviews and employee status. Carl stiffened in his chair. I didn't react. Sandra continued, I want to be absolutely clear. No decisions will be made until audits conclude. That statement didn't favor me or Carl, but it stripped him of the authority he thought he still had. For the first time, he didn't look like a manager. He looked like a suspect. After the meeting, people returned to their desks, but the energy had shifted. No one avoided me anymore. If anything, they looked at me with cautious respect, the kind you give someone who stood still while the building tilted. By late afternoon, the auditors began interviews. They pulled Elise first, then Mark from vendor management, then 2 analysts from compliance, and then my name appeared on the screen outside the interview room. I expected anxiety. Instead, I felt something else. Clarity. Because I wasn't walking into an interrogation. I was walking into the truth. The interview room was colder than the rest of the floor. On purpose. Auditors know temperature's a tool. Cold keeps people sharp, off balance, honest. 2 of them sat across from me, gray blazer, the one holding the radioactive sheet earlier, and a quiet man with rimless glasses who wrote notes without ever looking down. They didn't ask me to sit. They waited for me to choose to sit. Power dynamic established. I sat. Gray blazer clicked a pen. Thank you for your time. This isn't disciplinary. We're clarifying variance behaviors over the past quarter. A clean, neutral opener. She slid a thick printout toward me. I recognized the layout instantly. Approval chains. Timestamps. Authorization mismatches. The same anomalies I'd seen, except here they were magnified. Page after page, bound under a chain of custody seals. Do these look familiar? She asked. Yes, I said. They're part of the Q4 vendor reconciliations. And are these your adjustments? She pointed to several lines. No, I said. Those were approved under Carl's credentials. Rimless glasses wrote 3 words. 3, not more. Gray blazer continued. Do you personally have the ability to override vendor adjustment logs? No. Have you requested access? Never. Has anyone ever asked you to submit approvals on their behalf? That one made me pause, not because I needed time, but because they needed to see the pause. No, I said. But Carl asked for everyone's access logs last week. Everyone except his own. Rimless glasses wrote again, 1 sentence this time. And why? She asked calmly. Did he need your logs? Because he's constructing a narrative, I replied. A clean one, with a villain small enough to frame. They exchanged a glance, the kind professionals share when someone just confirmed a suspicion they weren't allowed to state. Then Gray Blazer closed her notebook. Last question for now, she said. Have you ever been disciplined for financial misconduct? No. And have you ever been asked to sign a termination form regarding such misconduct? Yes. When? Yesterday and this morning. A pause. Understood, she said. They thanked me, dismissed me, and immediately called the next person, not Carl. That's when the tension turned into something else. Movement. Speed. In the hallway, people whispered openly now, not about me, about Carl. At 2:10 p.m., Sandra's door shut with a soft click, the kind that means the conversation inside isn't meant to be heard. At 2:16, compliance joined her. At 2:20, legal. Carl stayed in his office the whole time, pretending to work, staring so hard at his screen he might as well have tried to burn a hole through it. By 3, HR walked toward him. 3 people, not 1. If HR brings 3, it's not paperwork. It's containment. They entered his office and closed the door. Frosted glass blurred their silhouettes, but you didn't need to see to understand the energy. Voices rose, one sharp, one defensive, one calm in a way only lawyers know how to be. People pretended not to listen. Pretended. The next 15 minutes were the longest I'd ever spent at a job. Not because I was invested in Carl's downfall, but because I finally understood the bigger picture. He hadn't tried to fire me to punish me. He'd tried to fire me to preempt me. to get rid of the only person who'd seen the inconsistencies early enough to connect the dots. But he'd miscalculated two things. I didn't scare easily. Quarterly auditors aren't loyal to department politics. At 3:22, the door opened. Carl stepped out first, and for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't look composed. He looked small, shoulders tight, lips pressed thin, eyes darting like someone scanning for exits. Behind him, HR followed, then legal, then Sandra. Carl turned toward the department. "Everyone," he said. "Can I have a moment?" But Sandra cut him off. "This won't take long," she said loudly, stepping forward. She held a sheet of paper. Not a folder, not a script, a single sheet, the kind of paper that ends careers. "As of this afternoon," she said, "Carl will be stepping away from his duties pending the outcome of the audit." No one breathed. "His access will be suspended," she continued. "His responsibilities reassigned." Carl opened his mouth, closed it. HR waited, expression blank. Legal stood beside them like a wall. He finally found words. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, voice cracking. This is premature. I have rights, and we are honoring them," Sandra replied calmly. "The auditors identified material inconsistencies requiring immediate action." Material inconsistencies. Auditor language for, "This isn't a mistake. This is a crisis." Carl turned toward me. For a second I saw something raw. Not anger, not blame. Recognition. He realized I had survived the trap he built. And worse, I had done nothing at all except tell the truth. Security arrived. Standard protocol for access suspension. No handcuffs, no scene. Just quiet, procedural dismantling of a man's position. Badge removed, laptop closed, office door locked. He wasn't escorted out. That's for criminals. He was escorted to the lobby. That's for liabilities. When the elevator doors closed behind him, no one spoke. Not from fear, from understanding. Corporate silence isn't empty. It's acknowledgement. Sandra turned to the department. "We'll continue operations as normal," she said, "and if anyone has information relevant to the audit, compliance will speak with you individually." People nodded, scattered. I stayed seated. Not triumphant, not smug, just tired. Because chaos doesn't feel like victory. It feels like noise finally settling. At 4:40, as the day wound down, Gray Blazer approached my desk. "We may need you tomorrow for follow-up," she said. "No problem." She paused, then added something she didn't have to say. Something auditors never say unless absolutely earned. "You did the right thing." And then she left. I sat back in my chair, and for the first time since this started, I understood something with absolute clarity. I wasn't the target. I was the witness Carl failed to erase. The morning after Carl was escorted out, the office felt strangely still, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when the air's heavy but the sky is finally clear. People whispered less, looked up more. No one avoided me now, not because I'd done anything heroic. I hadn't. I simply didn't disappear when someone tried to make me vanish. At 10:05 a.m., compliance called me in again. No cold room this time, no harsh lights, just a quiet office, blinds half open, sunlight cutting across a stack of documents like a spotlight. Gray Blazer was there. So was Sandra. So was someone I hadn't seen before. A director from corporate finance, flown in overnight. His badge said Morrison. He was the kind of person executives send when they need two things: a decision, a witness to that decision. "Have a seat," Morrison said. His tone wasn't warm, it wasn't cold, it was final. I sat. Gray Blazer opened the binder, the heavy one. Chain of custody seals, intact. Every page numbered. "We're going to summarize our findings," she said. "Not ask questions, not interview. Summarize." That alone told me the outcome was already locked in. She began, "In the course of the quarterly review, we identified an unreported variance totaling 2,074,612. March 19, across 4 vendor chains. These variances were manually overridden and approved under Carl's credentials. She turned a page. These overrides occurred outside standard hours. Turned another page. They were not logged in the system's change history, but the corresponding SQL trace files show direct manipulation. SQL trace files. That's the digital black box, the one no one can tamper with without leaving fingerprints. I nodded. They continued. Additionally, Morrison said, communication logs confirm Carl attempted to collect employee access histories in an effort to construct alternative explanations. Sandra didn't look surprised. She looked disappointed, like someone realizing she'd misjudged a person she trusted too long. Then she turned to me. You reported none of this, she said. I didn't know the full scale, I answered. I saw inconsistencies. I documented them. Quietly. Why quietly? Morrison asked. Because raising concerns without evidence makes you a target, I said, and I was already a target. No one argued. He nodded once, tiny, approving. Gray Blazer continued. Regarding your role in the flagged Hunter variance, we've reviewed the logs. It was exactly what you described. An automated rounding drift. They slid a printed report toward me. Officially cleared, she said. I didn't smile. I didn't thank her. Clearing someone of a lie shouldn't be considered generosity. Morrison leaned back. Given what you've endured, he said, and given your cooperation, corporate has made a decision. I waited. We're reinstating you fully, he said. Compensation unchanged. Predictable. Expected. Then, you'll also receive a correction bonus for the disruption. 2 months' salary. Unexpected. And, he added, we'd like to offer you interim oversight responsibilities while we restructure Carl's former team. That stopped me. Not because I wanted Carl's job. I didn't. But because the company wasn't just clearing me. They were repositioning me. Sandra folded her hands. You were the only person in this department who stayed steady, she said. You didn't speculate. You didn't fabricate. You didn't panic. That matters. I took a breath. Before I agree to anything, I said, I want something clarified. Of course, Morrison said. I want it clear, in writing, that the attempt to terminate me was unjustified, and that I refused to sign because the facts didn't support the claim. He nodded. That will be documented. Real protection isn't emotional. It's procedural. Paper beats memory every time. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk. People looked up. Some nodded. Some smiled. Some looked relieved. Probably relieved that the target wasn't them. But when I sat down, something felt different. Not victory. Not triumph. Closure. Because by then the story wasn't about Carl at all. It was about everything that came after. A week passed. Carl's access was permanently revoked. Legal took over. Rumors swirled. Possible clawbacks. Maybe even federal reporting, depending on what the auditors uncovered next. None of it involved me anymore. I was done being part of his story. 2 weeks later, Sandra stopped by my desk. Thought you should see this, she said, handing me an email. Internal memo. Short. Cold. Precise. Effective immediately. Carl Rasmussen is no longer employed by the company. No details. No explanations. Corporate endings never include eulogies. Sandra paused. You handled yourself well, she said. Better than most. Thank you, I replied. She hesitated. You know, if you ever want the permanent supervisor role, let me know. I shook my head. I don't want to manage people, I said. I just want to do my job. She actually smiled. Then do it, and let the rest be noise. When she left, I closed the memo and leaned back in my chair. The office hummed around me. Printers, keyboards, quiet conversations. Normal. For the first time in weeks, normal felt good. I logged into the vendor system, clean interface, clean logs, clean numbers, no shadows. I'd survived something I wasn't supposed to survive. Not because I fought harder, but because the truth was heavier than the lies someone tried to bury me under. Near the end of the day, as the floor emptied, I stood, gathered my things, and headed toward the elevator. In the reflection of the steel doors, I didn't see a survivor. I saw someone who finally understood something simple. You don't need revenge when reality does the work for you. The elevator opened. I stepped inside. The doors closed with a soft click, and that was that. No grand speech, no dramatic exit, just a man going home with his job, his integrity, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, in the end, the truth cost Carl far more than $2.8 million.